Unpacking Mormonism and Other Religious Trauma is meant for educational purposes only. Hello, and welcome back for another episode of Unpacking Mormonism and Other Religious Trauma. I'm dropping my shit all over the place already, so apologize for the distraction and the shake. I'm really excited about today. We are taking a break from our conspiracy theories series and our temple series in order to talk about a subject that I think is really important, especially if you've grown up in the Mormon community where we talk about a Heavenly Father on a regular basis. And so I'm excited to be here today with my co-host Mason Westbrook, as sexy as ever, and his friend Jordan. And I will let them introduce how they know each other and Jordan's wife Kayla. So Mason, go ahead. Why don't you introduce your friend today? Yeah, I'm gonna let you start today. I already started.
Okay. Sorry, let me sit up taller here. So Jordan and I met first when we were both in the Army at Fort Hood, Texas. He was a resident. I was a newly graduated CRNA. So we worked together on a fairly regular basis. And then I left a few years later, came to Fort Leonard Wood. And about a year after that, Jordan followed me because I'm just cool like that. Although he probably had no idea that he was following me.
It's all about Mason. All about Mason.
All I knew was that when I walked in the hospital that first day at Fort Leonard Wood, I could hear your guitar strumming and you singing and serenading all the people there.
That was the first day?
That was the first day. And
you got lucky.
I knew you were there.
It doesn't take very long for people to figure out that I'm there. That's true.
No, even at the civilian hospital where he's at now, that is what he's known for, is that guitar and the singing. And people will ask me, because we live in a very small community now, and people will say, oh, which anesthetist provider is your husband? I'm like, the one that sings. That's just the one that sings. And people are like, oh yeah, I think he was mine. So great.
Total
Don't
side note, I love to make, part of my job is to calm people down, right? That's just anesthesia does that. But I love to tell people, don't worry about it. I do anesthesia almost as well as I sing. So that gets some big eyes.
Then they want to hear you sing before you put them to sleep. So,
I only say that if they've already heard me sing, because then they're already stuck. Yeah.
Yeah. That's funny.
So welcome, Jordan and Kayla. I don't hardly know Kayla at all. I think it would be a good idea for the two of you to just kind of take a few minutes to kind of introduce this to you. And then maybe, Sarah, do you want them to move right into why this topic was important, or you just want to do the introduction first?
So like we said in our planning meeting, we're not a hello, little one. No, you're just fine.
We have a visitor.
We have 7 little ones at our house. They're not so little anymore. They're not that little anymore. So we love little ones.
Well, we'll get this one down for a nap, and hopefully
we love them even more when they're somebody else's little ones.
Yes.
Yeah, because when they're somebody else's little ones, they don't break my vacuum cleaner, which we discovered this morning that our vacuum cleaner is broken from
once again
8-year-old. Again.
I'd be surprised, but my kids do the same. So
yeah, well, maybe we need to baptize Tyler because of all of his breaking things. Maybe that would fix it. Probably not.
Yeah, sure. That would do it for sure.
That's funny.
Yeah, definitely changes things.
Yeah. So I would love to hear a little bit about your story, but not like the full story. Maybe give us kind of like a 15-minute overview for you, Jordan, and then when Kayla comes back, we'll let her know of kind of where she came from, just what's your background in the Mormon church. And then, I'd love to hear why this topic specifically, it really struck a chord in you and why you felt so passionate to talk about it with us today. So Kayla, since you just came back, if you could take 10 to 15 minutes to just kind of introduce yourself. I figured we'd do one of you and then the other one of you, and then go ahead and talk to us about why this topic, why Mother in Heaven is such a special topic for you and why you're passionate and wanting to talk about it with us today.
All right. Well, yeah, I can start introducing myself. So I'm Jordan. I was born and raised in Salt Lake City, Utah. I was born in the LDS church. My parents are both still active. My dad just finished being a bishop, I think last year. So, very, very active family, very, it was a very good family and a good upbringing. We were raised with good morals, good, caring for people around us and everything. And I have no real major complaints about my upbringing. So, I don't feel like I had any kind of, trauma from that. But as I grew up, I went after I graduated high school. I went on a mission to Russia, and had a great experience there. Learned the language, and it was just fantastic to be there. There's certainly some things looking back on that I maybe question now differently now that I am in kind of a post-Mormon place, but I still had a great experience with that. I feel like my religious deconstruction really started when I moved away from medical school. I, growing up in Utah, the bubble, as we call it for anybody who grew up in Utah, there's just not really any diversity, either of culture, race, or of thought even. So, moving away to medical school, I was able to be exposed to a lot of different ideas, a lot of different thoughts, and different people that all come from different upbringings and different backgrounds. Is that my mic? That's
No, I think it's Mason's. I think Mason's taking notes, and I can hear him taking notes. I was just getting ready to text him to say
just a tiny little bit, but I can't figure out where it does that, so I don't know how to stop it.
Yeah, so Mace, you might want to take notes in your lap because it's super distracting. It's really tapping. So
yeah, when I got to med school, one of the first things I noticed that really kind of changed my mindset was the amount of people who are in significantly poorer and worse socioeconomic status than I was. I went to med school in Houston at Baylor, and we covered one of the county hospitals there, and there are people who had just immigrated from anywhere in the world really that were coming in for care, and like just seeing how destitute they were. They couldn't get care. Like, for instance, people with chronic kidney disease couldn't get their dialysis scheduled, so they would come into the emergency room once every week or two to get it done. And I mean, it was just kind of terrible to see the things that they had to go through for that. And so that just kind of seeing that, I think, really changed my mindset as far as my relationship to how I see other people, how I see their struggles and everything. Because coming up in the church, obviously they don't teach us that there's not going to be struggles, but you feel like you have this higher power behind you that is supporting you and like giving you the strength, but you don't see other people the same way. So
well, can I just jump in and say too that Jordan, like originally, I don't know if you said what your field is. Did you say that? Yep. Are you okay if I mention this? Okay. Anyway, so originally when we were going through medical school, Jordan was really gung-ho about ophthalmology. And then as soon as he got into OB, he was like, oh no, this is where I want to be. And of course, we're like family. We're this little family, and ophthalmology hours are definitely better than OB hours. And Jordan's like, I don't know, should I do this? But he just loved it. But I could tell he was so much more passionate about women's health, and he has just more of an attitude that I think that women really like to see in a doctor who is caring for them in their health. And so that was one of the things that I noticed in him, that really I could see how that like softer, gentler side really made him have this love for making sure women get the health and the rights that they need, and so it really did change
Well,
change
and
him.
I love that. I don't know if you guys have read. I just looked it up. That's why I was looking down. I am currently reading the book. Oh, see, I'm terrible with names. I have multiple sclerosis, and I want to say that my neuro-ophthalmologist never sees me at 2:00 in the morning when my eyes hurt. So I definitely understand the hours thing.
Yes.
I can't count the number of epidurals I've done at 2:00 in the morning. So yeah,
Right.
definitely different.
Right.
Yep. The number of deliveries I've done,
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Yep. But the book is The Power of Days by Celeste Mergens. Have you read that or heard about
I've never heard about that. No.
Oh, I'm gonna just put a plug in for that really quickly. Celeste Mergens is actually still active LDS from everything that I can see. But she created the Days for Girls Foundation, which was in those deeply impoverished communities, like basically south of the equator is most of where she's done her service. Was that when young girls would menstruate, they were not able to go to school. So they academically were falling behind because they could not afford pads and tampons. And then pads and tampons, the single-use pads and tampons that, we primarily use here in the United States, would become a huge litter issue, a waste issue. They would be strung along the sides of the streets and whatnot. And so they couldn't get their hands on them, for one, because they couldn't afford them. And then for the few that could afford them, they didn't have the appropriate disposal systems in place. And so she created the multi-use pads for women in impoverished places. But she talks about just how access to supplies and care and knowledge can have such a huge positive impact and an empowering impact, and that the way out of poverty is not by giving people money, but by giving them skills so that they can climb themselves out. But in order to have those skills, they have to have resources. Like, you can't teach a hungry person new skills. They have to be fed. That's basic neuroscience. Our bodies cannot learn new things when we are hungry or afraid or whatever. But she talked about giving in this book, and it's a beautifully powerful book. I'm about halfway through it. It is just inspiring. And so I definitely recommend anybody who's listening to check out that book. But one of the things that I loved about it is that she's looking and bringing awareness to how poverty changes everything for people, and that these girls, she says, basically by giving them these multi-use pads that that they sewed and snapped into their underwear that they were able to wash out and whatnot, she gave them their days back, because that's what they call it in those impoverished communities, that they had to be out because it was their days that they were menstruating. And so she was able to give them their days back just by giving them supplies that they could use over and over and over again. And she talks about going into those communities and teaching them with like treadle sewing machines, because they don't have consistent electricity, how to make their own, so that she wasn't just providing them with something, she was providing them with something and then the skill to continue to provide that for women for generations and generations. And so a lot of the research she points to in that book is very supportive of what you're talking about. So just put that plug in.
Yeah,
and there.
I'll
That's
have to read
a
that.
Sarah Squirrel.
It sounds like a great book. I'll have to look at that.
So.
But yeah, like Kayla was saying, I once I got into OB, I really found the place for me, and that's kind of turned into my my passion for women's health. And so I did an OBGYN residency in San Antonio. Again, that's where I met Mason. Was doing some outside rotations up at Fort Hood, a couple hours away from that. I got out and practiced for a year at Fort Leonard Wood, and then I in my final year of residency, I applied for a fellowship in urogynecology, which is essentially medical and surgical treatments for women with pelvic floor disorders, so prolapse, incontinence, sexual function disorders, a whole bunch of different issues that are honestly pretty neglected in medicine. And so, most patients, when they come to me, they're like, I didn't even know you existed. And so, plug out there for any women experiencing pelvic floor issues, find a local urogynecologist. We do exist and we can help you. But that's kind of where where I started in terms of my like passion for bringing more equality in terms of women. And Kayla has done a lot more looking and research into Heavenly Mother and everything, but it really did affect me as well in terms of her bringing that up when I already had this passion for women's health, and I would call myself a feminist, so that was
Yay.
Yeah.
Oh,
So I'll turn it over to Kayla and let her kind of talk a little bit.
Or a lot of it.
Good.
Well, since this is kind of how it goes, and anytime Mormons give talks, I guess I'll go into the more like family part of it too. But
can't break with tradition. That would be inappropriate.
Yeah, it's Sunday. Typical.
Right.
Anyway,
Right.
So
Yeah. When was the last time you guys were assigned to speak in church?
oh, it's been a couple years.
Yeah, I don't even remember.
I think they're afraid of me now.
Yeah, I have that similar experience for sure.
But yeah. So, like Jordan said, so we both grew up in Utah. He grew up in the Salt Lake area, and I grew up in Riverdale, which is like close to the Ogden area, if you're familiar with Utah. So about 45 minutes apart. We didn't meet each other until, of course, we went to BYU, and I double majored in an MRS degree. Just kidding. Anyway.
BYU doers, we got it.
Yep.
I definitely didn't I knew from 6th grade that I wanted to be a nurse, and I was always very passionate and very very stick to my guns on that. So I knew that I wanted to do that, and I'm grateful that throughout Jordan's career I've been able to kind of step by step do what I needed to do to get into that. And actually right now I'm working as a school nurse, and so I'm really into the community care, and it's been awesome for me in that way. But
so Kayla, I'm going to pause you really quickly. So Alex, our producer, has never been Mormon, and so he just asked me, can you tell us about BYU doers, because he's not familiar with what that means. So would you guys like to talk about BYU doers, or do you want me to go ahead and talk about what that means?
You probably have a better, you've talked about it before on your podcast, so you go ahead.
Okay, so yeah, my parents are what I call BYU doers. So BYU is a Mormon private school. And when you go there, there's this rush after a man goes on his mission, and after a female graduates from high school, there's this rush to get married very, very young. And so one of the phenomenons that I see is that a lot of, especially females, get to BYU, they don't ever finish their degrees, because part of your, I'm going to say, mission or purpose in going to a church school like BYU is to find your quote unquote eternal partner. So basically it's a hunting ground for marriage. And so when we call you, literally, when we call you a BYU doer, it's just kind of the play on words about that subculture of Mormon sponsored schools, that part of the reason you are at school is to find your eternal companion, get married, start a family, and because there's a plethora of other people who think like you, look like you, practice religion like you, have the same ideas as you. It's a breeding ground for really unhealthy relationships. Mostly because you don't, and I'm not saying at all that your relationship is unhealthy. But the reason I say it's a breeding ground for unhealthy relationships is that you're usually getting into a partnership without knowing anything about diversity and how to talk about disagreements or even have a different opinion than somebody else. You're just it's that very cyclical. It's the same thing you've been taught from the time you were little. It's not an environment where people go to create new ideas that challenge the norm. Whereas when I went to I graduated from Walden University, which is an online school, and I had to do my master's degree at an online school because it's really hard for the spouse of an active duty military person to finish any kind of a degree because you move constantly. So I finished my master's degree at Walden University, and Walden was all about, can you come up with ideas that challenge norms that don't seem to be working as well so that you can influence positive social change? And that is not the culture of church schools. And so when you end up in these relationships, you see a lot of couples really struggle with, like what Jordan was saying earlier, when you get hit with diversity, you don't know what to do with it because you don't have any experience. And so when I'm sending my kids out to school, I'm hoping that they can experience new ways of thinking that Mason and I maybe didn't introduce them to. We want them to kind of become their own person. Whereas for BYU doers, it's more, we want you to go here so that you get married to somebody who thinks the same way we do, so that we keep this bubble and this like everything close knit.
In society, we get oftentimes, the quote from the Beatles, all you need is love. In religion, and in particular in Mormonism, which is where, of course, we have our expertise, you get the message, all you need is God. And so if you can go to a place where you're going to find somebody that has the same religion as you together, you don't have to worry about all the other stuff, because all you need is God. It doesn't matter really if you're even compatible. It doesn't matter if you have equal interests. It doesn't matter if one person wants 7 kids and the other person doesn't really want kids. That none of that matters, because you have God. That's all you have to do. Yeah. So it can be dangerous, because lots of people walk away from BYU and have long-lasting and very good relationships. Absolutely. But lots of people will walk away and they'll struggle their whole marriage because they just didn't know that it could be done in a different way. And so it's not that people go to get hitched. It's that they go and they don't learn the things that they need to learn to make a marriage that they want to last forever, to make it last forever in a happy way.
Well, in BYU as a church school, there are some programs at BYU that are absolutely top notch in the country. Yeah. Like they, in some areas, they do an amazing job with education. I think it just really lacks in cultural diversity. So anyway, So the idea is you go to a church school because that is where you're going to find your eternal forever companion. So go to BYU to get an education and a spouse.
So there's your big squirrel. Go ahead, Kayla. Let's continue.
All right, keep going, Kayla. Yep, there's the squirrel. There's the squirrel.
So that's where we met, was BYU, and through the typical channels of like FHE, Family Home Evening is what FHE stands for, and it's so weird because they make you be like a quote unquote mom or dad of the FHE group, because obviously the leaders of FHE in a normal family unit would be the mom and dad, And so that's so weird. And anyway, I just remember having weird interactions with the guy who was like the dad of our FHE group.
Anyway. Right. Like, what happens if you want to date the dad of the FHE?
I'm like, no,
group.
Not him. No.
Or the mom. Or,
I think that they want, Anyway, sorry, that's my tangent.
That's her squirrel.
But that's how we met, and we really connected pretty quickly, and it had a lot of similar interests and aspirations, and I'm just grateful that like I married him though too, because of the career that he picked. It did force us to move away from the Utah bubble and to experience more things.
Same for us.
And so it's honestly been good for us both to help widen and expand our views. And So anyway, like going into a little like more personal about me, I am the youngest of 5 girls, and he's the oldest of 4 boys, funnily enough. So we like switched that. And and so it was really interesting, like coming into his family dynamic with all boys. And but as far as like my family goes, I would say that I grew up like with some dysfunction. And I don't feel like dysfunction necessarily means bad. Like in my mind, it just means like different, or it can be challenging. But I would say that the dysfunction comes from the fact that I am a twin, and my twin has cerebral palsy and has been in a wheelchair her whole life.
Let's take a quick break, and we'll be right back.
The world's most exciting podcast, home of borders, language, culture. And here he is, New York Times best-selling author and National Radio Hall of Fame inductee, Michael Savage.
I'm Michael Savage, host of the Savage Nation podcast, home of borders, language, and culture. Be here or be nowhere. The Savage Nation podcast.
Catch the Michael Savage podcast on all podcast platforms every Tuesday and every Friday.
And that's honestly, I do feel like where a lot of my desire to be a caregiver comes from, is growing up in this relationship where I'm forced to be a caregiver. And and that was really a driving force for me, for good, but also for bad in some areas. And, I do think my parents did a great job in raising us girls to be very strong, very opinionated, very hardworking and aspirational. And, and despite, and my dad also traveled a lot. We were very much like the middle class, like family. I remember like always, like there was struggles to make the ends meet during times in our life, and living kind of more month by month. And also I was the youngest, so I was kind of naive about those things. But like, I know that was really hard on my family, and it took a toll on my mom, especially with my dad being gone a lot and having to travel a lot on Sundays, and she doing a lot of the work by herself and having to take care of, a daughter who has special needs. And so I realize that now, seeing that and seeing what my mom had to deal with. And, I remember there was a Sunday when, as I got older, my mom, she would sleep a lot on the weekends, I'm sure to rest and recoup, and wouldn't be going to church. And I remember I was sleeping in on a Sunday, and my dad's like practically pulling me out of bed to go. And I'm like, well, mom doesn't go to church. Like, why should I, And like that not being, and I don't like blame my mom for that or whatever, but it was just this like idea of like, no, we have to go to church. And I feel like that in our family, and my family might disagree, but I do kind of feel like that we used church as a way to show up and show, no, we're still this normal, happy family. Though we're one with hardships, we're still very abundantly blessed. And like, so I do feel like it in a way is kind of a front to like hide the things that are really going on. Even though actually there was a lot about our church attendance that I think really affected my mom, that made her feel like not socially supported. I think a lot of people don't know how to support someone who has a special needs child, myself included, because I don't have a special needs child. But I think that, that I think a lot of people don't understand how to support people in that situation. So I think my mom often felt maybe ignored, maybe, not supported in that, and it was difficult for her.
Especially, so I'm gonna jump in, especially when you're in an environment where struggle is an indication of evil. And even though they don't overtly teach that anymore, like, I mean, it used to be very much an overt teaching, and it's not anymore. I remember when we went from, handicapped children were bad or evil, or they did something wrong, to they were the most special in the pre-existence. Like, I remember that flippin' teaching when I was very small. Being an Army wife and a mother of a kiddo with schizophrenia, I can say that the burnout in my own life, and Mason was in leadership. So not only was Mason military, but when he was there, he was always on the stand. So even when he was at church with me, I was still alone at church, and our family couldn't, it was like we had to hide how much we were struggling so that he could show up and be enough. And we didn't want anybody to think, oh my goodness, we don't want to burden the Westbrooks anymore. But what ended up happening is that people would view me as though I was this superwoman. They couldn't see that on the inside, I was literally dying of loneliness and exhaustion. And I didn't know what to do at that time, because, I mean, it's incredibly rare to have a child with full-blown schizophrenia. Brig was diagnosed with psychosis right before his 5th birthday. And so that's incredibly rare. And just nobody could really know. But also, I didn't want anybody to come in because I didn't want to be viewed as weak. So not only did people not necessarily know how to serve me, but as a special needs mama, I also held people at bay, because if they brought in the type of service that wasn't helpful, it became harder for me to do what needed to be done. Like, things like, here, let me bring in all of this food. And I'm like, but we're trying to rule out, like, from under the doctor's supervision, we're trying to rule out certain foods to make sure that that's not what's causing some of these significant behavioral challenges that we were doing. And, even Mason's mom at one point told us that our son was possessed of demons and devils, and that we needed to basically do an exorcism. Like, let's cast the devils out of him and he'll be okay. And I mean, I get that, because when Brig was in a state of psychosis, he was feral. Like, you would look at him and he looked wild. He looked crazy, and he would paint with his poop all over the walls. And I mean, there was some really challenging moments. And so oftentimes accepting help from other people became a burden. And so it was very easy to withdraw. So my heart goes out to you, to your mama in that. But also my kids had to grow up in a very different environment, having a sibling that needed that much care. They grew up faster. And so was it an area of dysfunction? Yeah, our home was definitely dysfunctional, not because Mason and I were beating anybody or yelling and screaming at each other, but just because we had this challenge that forced our littlest ones to become grown-ups very fast in order to keep everybody alive. Mason, Mason raises his hand when he wants me to shut up.
No, I raise my hand when I want to say something. They're not exactly the same.
Okay, fair.
Like you mentioned earlier, talking about diversity, right? You had to move away from Salt Lake City really to be exposed to diversity in a real sense. It's not like there's not some diversity in Salt Lake City. There's not like there's some diversity in other places. You get your kind of token exposure, but you don't really get to know people of diversity unless you're in a place where there's lots of them, where they can behave the way they want to behave, not in a way that they've been sucked into this society and I have to behave this way in order to be protected and accepted. It's the same way really with exposure to special needs. Like, you would have no idea what people go through with cystic fibrosis. I'm sorry, it wasn't cystic fibrosis. It was
cerebral palsy.
Cerebral palsy. You'd have no idea what people go through in taking care of a child with cerebral palsy until you've been exposed to it. We'd have no idea what people would go through taking care of a child that is goes through psychosis on a fairly regular basis. One that actually in psychosis tried to seriously hurt his siblings. You just don't know until you're exposed. And the thought that came to me that you're talking about why your mom didn't really feel supported. I feel like Mormonism really teaches fast solutions.
Right.
They teach
Or that it
endure
has
to the
to,
end.
right? Or that it has to be fixed in order for you to have significant value out of it.
Right.
And some
so
things aren't
Mormonism,
fixable.
so many members of Mormonism, and I don't know if this is the case in other religions, but so many members of Mormonism, they don't know how to help on the really hard things, because now you're asking them to engage on a long-term basis. And we just don't know how to do that. We're taught, bring the casseroles. Somebody's hurting, bring the casseroles. Let's go
Do the
clean
yard
their
work.
house. You're taught these fast solutions. Let's do something we can do, but it doesn't overall really help with the long-term issues. And so, that can be a real struggle for people to go through.
Yeah. And I don't want to put my, mom or parents or anything like that in a negative light. This is just the reality
not at
of
all.
how I have viewed this experience and everything like that. Honestly, I just feel like more power to them because they've, dealt with it in the best way that they could and knew how to. And honestly, they also grew up with dysfunction in their families.
Sure.
So I feel like they have managed to do so much better, even with us as raising us, and what they had to deal with as well.
Yeah.
Sure.
Well, and I also don't want to discredit, sometimes bringing in the casseroles and doing the yard work and cleaning the house is the best help that somebody
Sure.
could be offered
can be,
in certain
yeah.
situations. But in these chronic areas, it's just not.
Mm-hmm.
It's not as connective as it could be if we knew how to sit with people in true struggle and just let the struggle be rather than trying to fix it.
Yeah.
So
that sounds like a really feminist point of view here, because most men just want to fix it. That's the MO.
Right.
I think that's a big deal too, is that because that happens with the genders and the sexes as well, right? We have all of, I do things a certain way. It's just the natural thing for me. This is how I want to manage things. And until I can step aside, or usually be pushed to the side so that I can see something from a different perspective, I don't even know, how many people in a marriage talk about, my marriage is falling apart and I didn't even know there was anything going on. It's because we're not actively trying to see things or understand things from someone's perspective. How many Mormons in particular, how many of them would walk away from the church if they simply took the time to look at the issues? But we don't. We're taught we don't do that. We don't look at the issues. We turn a blind eye. We don't talk about that kind of stuff. And while Mormonism has so many victories and stories we like to tell about, and Mormons in general are very good people, so it stands to reason there would be victories. There's going to be wins there. But overall, there's things that are happening on a consistent basis that are ugly, that are things that could change if we took the time to examine them from a different perspective.
Yeah.
Well, and shout out to our men. They're taught from the time they're little that they're not supposed to express their emotional things.
Right.
And then we put them in Mormonism, and now they have the power of God from the time they're 12. They're not allowed to fail. They're not allowed to be wrong. They have to protect. They're solely responsible for making these decisions. It's a lot of pressure. And so I think a lot of times when our men are trying to solve things, I don't think it's because they think they know everything, but because they're expected to do it. And they do it quickly because it's like, okay, if this will solve the problem, then that's one less thing on my plate that I have to worry about. And I don't think that that's men being assholes. I think that's men falling victims to the expectations that we've placed on them because we don't support men and women truly being equal partners in
Mhm.
everything.
Right.
Men are wounded, not toxic is kind of.
So I am going to tag in the show notes. I am going to tag that episode that we just did recently so that people can listen to that, because that's true. And then just in the interest of what we're trying to do, we're about 45 minutes into this. So unless there's something specific about your story that you feel needs to be told, we might want to move forward to.
Do you need to? Were you gonna say something?
No, go ahead.
Okay. So, okay. Just knowing something about me is that I am a bit of a storyteller. Anyway,
Stories are great. Stories are great. You're good. Take your time.
That's part of my creative outlet and stuff. And so I've always been a writer, but I do want to, I'm glad to highlight my mom, because I feel like it's important for you to understand this relationship as I've started learning more about Heavenly Mother, how important it was for me to have this close relationship with my own mother, as well as with my sisters, and growing up with all of this feminine energy in my home, and so I remember as a young girl asking my sisters and my mom, while we're all in the kitchen together, which is what's common occurrence, why don't girls have priesthood? And I got the same, and in the Mormon Church, priesthood is the power, it's an ordinance given just to men, starting from around age 12 and upwards, and them increasing in their priesthood power and levels as they go through different ages.
Yeah, what buzzing. I'm not sure whose microphone. Oh, it's out.
Maybe
keep going.
So I remember receiving responses from my family oh, I wouldn't want the priesthood and all the extra responsibility, or women are just naturally better at serving others and we don't need the priesthood. And also women
blah blah blah, right?
Sacred responsibility to bear children. And I kind of just nodded and ran along, and then but it always just kind of bothered me. And then as we moved away to Houston, he basically said it, that we were exposed more to different thoughts. I remember having my first real encounters with some Mormon feminists, and a friend who was in law school, she said to me one Sunday that she had overheard in the elders quorum meeting, which is a male only meeting on Sunday, that one of the men had said that he didn't believe that women were doing their duty if they were working outside of the home. And of course I just gasped in shock, but at the same time I kind of just shrugged my shoulders and was well, what can be done? And also kind of in my mind, I think I just said, well, that's really not a problem. Most men aren't going to believe that, right? Most men are hopefully past this point of believing these very outdated beliefs. But that was also myself just telling myself that no, there's not a problem. And it's important.
It's called gaslighting yourself.
Yeah.
So, we make a habit of it.
Right. And I remember for me, when I went to work after I graduated with my master's degree, I went to work after my youngest at the time had started all day preschool. The amount of guilt and shame anytime anything kid got sick at school, anytime anything came up, the amount of guilt I felt that I was failing because I was working outside of my home rather than being at home waiting for the kids to need me for something while they were at school. It was overwhelming. So yeah, it could be just a few men that still teach it. It could just be these few, but it is so ingrained in us from the time we're little that the woman's place is in the home with the kids.
Mm-hmm.
It's very problematic.
Yeah.
And I think contrary to that, for men, we're taught that we're supposed to be outside of the home. We're supposed to be the breadwinners. We're not supposed to be as emotionally attached. And I think that limits the amount, of course, a good father can have influence on their children, but, it changes your relationship with them to the point where, you can't. A lot of people have trouble making a deep emotional connection specifically with their father because of that.
Yeah.
Personally, my father's great. I have a wonderful connection with him, but I know a lot of people do, and that really can come down to, some of those teachings and those habits that we
But
fall into.
but your father had all boys, and
He did.
so boys connect very differently with their fathers than girls do. And I think that that's something that I see a lot in my post-Mormon clients. Is it's almost like the girls are expected to bond and be like their mothers, and the boys are expected to bond and be like their fathers, and we don't cross it. We don't. Oh, there's my hands. We don't cross that in a way that is allowing, again, for that just your in your own home diversity with the relationships you have with your parents. It is vitally important for young children, especially, to have a strong emotional connection to both caregivers.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
So as we moved farther away, I became, through my own medical learning as well. It also opened my eyes to the disparity that women and children face, in that world. But also I started noticing a lot more within the church. And I really did try to convince myself that this wasn't an issue or ignore it or whatever. I had a friend who joined Ordained Women, which was a big movement. And I was like, oh no. That's just really stepping over the line. Like you can support women in the church, but that's over the line, And I know that not everybody will be familiar with Ordained Women, but it was.
Let me plug that in. So it's Kate Kelly was the organizer of it, and she was very vocal, and she led some protests at General Conference about being truly equal, give women equal rights. And while her platform was, if we give women the priesthood, then we have equal rights, it was a lot deeper than that. It was about, equal representation. It was about equal leadership opportunities. It was about trusting the women without getting a male's, okay and write off on everything, because a woman cannot make a single decision in the church without, or in her home in Mormonism, without it being okayed and signed off on by the man. There, nothing goes from a woman into action without it being signed off by the priesthood holder. And like you, Kayla, I remember when Kate Kelly came out for me, I was like, wow, that's really significant. That's really powerful, but she's going about it the wrong way. Mm-hmm. And then on this side, I'm like, there's no other way to go about it. Like, what other option did she have? But it was that, that again, like Mason said, kind of gaslighting myself. It was like, she's got great points. This needs to be said, but she's saying it wrong. Mm-hmm. And the only reason it was saying it wrong was because she was openly questioning the leaders, but nobody changes until they are questioned. Nobody.
I think, what is it? There's like a quote that says something like, heretics, people who are called heretics are just those who tell the truth sooner, or something like that. It's anyway, not an exact quote, but true.
Right. No, I get what you're saying. Well, and if you think about it, Jesus was the one that was like, hey, Pharisees, you guys aren't doing this right. I'm going to push back against you. But then when we post-Mormons, ex-Mormons, Mormons who are questioning, when we give pushback, we're criticized for it. And then they tell us to be more Christ-like. And I remember telling, I think, Mason, it was your mom, I was like, I'm just trying to be like Jesus and push back against leaders who are practicing in ways that are harming the people that they're supposed to be serving. And she didn't like that very much.
Well, Jesus said, you have heard it said that thou shalt not kill, but I say thou shalt not get angry, right? Or you've heard it said that thou shalt not commit adultery. I say don't even look at a woman to lust after. Like, he changed the perspective of what was basic and very foundational laws for that culture and religion. So yeah, we have to push against that. I think that we get silenced so much because they make it about that issue. Well, you wouldn't want that one issue to come between you and your salvation, right? I mean, yeah, maybe women should be more represented, but you don't want that one issue to get in the way of you being able to go back to the celestial kingdom with your husband, right? And so we get silenced because we don't want that one issue to get in the way of something that we consider to be an existential reality. And so we get shut up until you investigate to the point that there's so much, you realize it's not just one issue. It's not just one thing, but so many people get shut up because of that idea. Don't let that one thing get in the way. Don't let that heretic, don't let that apostate brother of yours get in the way of you getting back to the celestial kingdom. And so we get shut up because we're not allowed to think.
Yeah.
Well, right now it's think celestial.
Right, right.
I don't know what that means. I don't know what that means, but think celestial.
You know, Sarah, like you were saying with when you were talking with, I think you said Mason's mother. I think one of the big problems is that, I mean, this is common to all of humanity, is that people don't want to be wrong, like in general, you know. So being like, people go to great lengths to avoid finding out for themselves that they're wrong. They'll go to great lengths to avoid being told by others that they're wrong. When really being wrong is, I think, one of the greatest opportunities that we have, because we get to learn really what was right. And you know, in my current position, my fellowship, we do a lot of biomedical research, and you know, really the way that we advance things is by trying to prove ourselves wrong. And if you can prove yourself wrong, then you just advance the whole fund of knowledge that all of science has.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and in religion, it's really, you can't be wrong, because if you are, you're going to lose everything. Whereas when we look at being wrong in science, it's, I'm wrong. What can I gain from knowing that this is not the way to do it? Like, you can't learn without messing up. You can't learn without being wrong. You can't learn without questions. And the challenge in, you know, organizations with a lot of undue influence, very like Mormonism, is that if the church leaders are wrong, then everything is quote unquote lost. You lose your, I know for me, I knew something was wrong and it bothered me for years. I was not willing to look into it further because I didn't want to lose my kids in heaven. And Mason and I struggled with infertility. So of our 7 children, 4 of them are adopted, because I couldn't get pregnant without a lot of medical intervention. And then when I got pregnant, even with medical intervention, I miscarried. Goodness, I got pregnant 11 times. Yeah, I got pregnant 11 times and carried 3 to term. So it was just so much loss for me with the fertility issues. And then, you know, when you do adoption, you lose adoptions. It's just part of that environment. I could not continue to question because I was afraid I was going to lose my family. And when I finally stepped out, I gained my family back. Like, my children's and Mason's and my relationship, we're all closer. But those that are still in the Mormon system, there's this huge gaping distance. There's this canyon between us now. And so that fear of loss is so real. So yeah, I agree with you, Jordan, in the sense that it's like we're not, it's normal for humans to be afraid of being wrong, but when the consequence of being wrong is that you are going to lose your community and your familial relationships, your brain doesn't let you be wrong.
Yeah.
Little ones. I offended Jordan. He walked away to go take care of a little one. Keep going, Kayla.
You used his name. Don't do that.
Well,
oh God.
You know, I feel like this is important to detail all of this to understand the my like transition through all of this. But one thing that I felt like really happened in the midst of Jordan being in medical school and residency, and when I say that I had to like do my nursing career piece by piece, it literally was. It was in between him doing medical school and, you know, us being like, oh, okay, well, between your 3rd and 4th year, it's not going to be as busy, so we can have a baby that year. You know, like so much like planning our life around this, like his medical field, and me being like, well, I have to, the only time I can work on weekends right now, because I'm also doing school full time, and we're putting our kid in daycare, and we're doing all these things. And I felt that I lost myself a lot. in this term. And being told by the church, you're a mom, you should feel so fulfilled, you should feel, and it was like I gave myself permission to be educated, because again, the church says education is great, but as far as like working outside of the home, besides the fact that, you know, during the times that I did work, we needed that extra income, and so of course I didn't feel guilty at that point. But when I pictured myself in my mind working outside of the home, doing what I actually wanted to do, it felt so far away from me, and it felt so like that was not a possibility, and that also I was going against the nature of being a woman and supposed to be a mom and just loving that time at home with my kids. And that was such a struggle for me internally. And I remember talking to friends about it and just kind of just saying it over and over and over and over again about how unfulfilled I felt during this time. And also, you know, being in the military, it's such a control place. Like I felt like I had really no choice in where we got to live and where it was going, like where we were going to end up. And even my own career, it had to come second to his, even more so, I feel like, because we always had to, I felt like I always needed to wait about a year to get settled before I could really focus on myself and do those things. And so these were things that I felt in my mind that actually spurred me trying to find a community for myself that could validate me and uplift me. And it was not something I was getting within just church, because church was telling me, you're a mom, you should just love this time. And I was like, but it's not enough. It does not feel like enough to me. My cup was not full. And so, anyway, I don't know if there was like any,
I think,
yeah.
I think the passion and the emotion that you're putting in this is going to speak to so many people in our audience, because I remember feeling that way. It's like the church glorifies female burnout. It is like, in order for you to be righteous as a woman in the church, you have to be empty, because you have given so much of you to everybody else. But that is how you're righteous. That is how you make it to heaven. And when you get to heaven, guess what? Now you get to share your husband with however many wives, and you get to do it again. But because you've got to populate a world, you're going to eternally be a mom. And yeah, I think that what you're seeing speaks to women everywhere who are stuck in these systems where you are not righteous, you are not enough unless you are so burned out. You are literally just a zombie going through the motions. And that somehow is beautiful and glorious. In my practice, and something that Brene Brown has said over and over and over again, is that you can't love others more than you love yourself. And so it is so vitally important when we talk about self-care and feeling fulfilled in your life. If you want to be the best parent ever, you have to love you. You have to take care of you. You have to feel fulfilled within you. You cannot function at your finest as a parent and connect with your babies in the way that your babies need when you're constantly empty. So
but you can't have dreams beyond the prescribed dreams.
Right.
Like you can dream to be the best mother ever. That's great. Let's do that. But you can't dream of being a working mom. You can't dream of being a nurse that is actually working in whatever field you want. No, maybe a school nurse, like you said, right? Maybe a school nurse, because then you can still take care of your kids. Maybe that's okay, right? You have to, all your dreams have to fall into the prescribed thing. And that's not just women, right? So many men are taught, well, if you don't get a job that can support your family and support the 12 kids you're supposed to have, then what's your value really? And so oftentimes people will go into, I mean, just think it's almost cliche how many dentists are in Utah. because everybody wants this great job that will provide well for the family, but still let me be at home, or still let me be a bishop, or still let me be that young men's president. And so they get into this job that my guess is at least 50% of them have no interest in being in. It's just a job they thought would fit well with what their prescribed dreams are. And so that's a real struggle, because you're left going, how do I do this? And too many people they'll come to the conclusion, I can't. So I guess I'm just stuck here.
Yeah.
Right. Like my dad was a teacher, but then he was a referee afterwards to bring in extra money. And then over the summers, he worked, he drove trucks for a trust company. He had at any given time at least 3 jobs so that my mom could stay home to raise us, because that's what was supposed to happen. And then my mom took in babies as daycare. She provided in-home daycare. And I love my mom. She hates babies. She does not enjoy young children. It's just not her forte, but she did it because that was the only job she could do to still be with us kids. And I remember my mom would withdraw from us, like you had said earlier, Kayla, like your mom would just sleep on the weekends from just sheer exhaustion. And I mean, I very much remember, and my mom, again, did the best job that she knew how to do, but there wasn't another option. She didn't have the permission to go out and do things that she loved. So she would withdraw from us. She would lock herself in her room, and us kids, we would fight. Like we were full on punching and hitting each other and screaming at each other and being mean to each other. And mom would not come out of her room to take care of it because she was burned out. Hey, head on over to Amazon and buy your copy of Trauma Bonded, a true story of navigating attachments forged in complex PTSD by me, Sarah Westbrook.
Chicken tacos should only be trusted to chicken professionals.
That's where we come in. Introducing Zaxby's new chicken finger tacos. One comes with pico de gallo and creamy chipotle ranch. And the other comes with bacon, lettuce, tomato, and avocado ranch. Chicken experts since 1990. Chicken taco experts since now. Order yours today in the Zax Rewards app. Woo, saucy! Zaxby's.
But she was a righteous woman because my dad was a teacher and they lived on very little money in order to keep my mom at home. And that was glorified as being righteous. And I just wonder how much happier my mom would have been if she could have had healthy adult contact and a job that she loved. And I mean, if the community had rallied around her differently, how she might have shown up differently for us kids.
Certainly.
So, yeah, so much of that. And I also want to say too that like throughout our marriage, I feel like Jordan has always been super supportive of my dreams and what I have wanted to do. And it's just been our circumstances that I think that it has made me feel boxed in at times, but especially the pressure from the church in shaping.
It's the cultural right. So those cultural expectations, like Mason said, this is the right way to do a family. And if you're doing it outside of this right way, your family is going to have challenges and the devil's going to be more influential in your life. And when your kids make mistakes, it's probably going to be because the mom isn't doing what she's supposed to do. Yeah. And so it's perceived pressure. It's the cultural norms that really box you in. Mason has always been incredibly supportive. I went to school because he was in the military, and the reality that he might die while at war and leave me alone to raise the kids is why I went to school. I was like, I have to have a backup plan because Mason's going to die. And we have all these children because, you know, the church told us to. I had infertility and we put ourselves in deep debt, making sure that we could adopt enough kids to get our numbers up. And I know that sounds terrible. I love all 7 of my children with everything in my soul, but we burned ourselves out doing that in order to meet that church expectation. And so, yeah, I went to school as a backup plan and
Yeah,
discovered
you did,
that
kind of.
I love mental health. I love it. And being a mom, a stay-at-home mom of 7 that's hard. And gratefully they all go to public schools so that I don't go crazy.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Yeah.
public schools.
Yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, so like all of these feelings and everything, especially during this time in my life, is what I felt like I realized there was something missing, especially in the church for me, and what that meant for my role within the church. And it's kind
About
of hard.
how old were you when you say this time in my life? About how old were you?
20, let's see, 23, 24, probably, maybe 24.
Oh, so yeah, you're still in the developmental phase of life
Yeah.
where you're really consumed with yourself and your personal growth outside of your family of origin. Like
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
like your
It was
20s
like
is
my
when you're
mid to upper 20s, I would say. Yeah.
yeah, like you've got a fully formed frontal cortex and you're learning how to interface with the world and what your role of significance is at that point in your life. Like developmentally speaking, if we go to like Eric Erickson and whatnot. So like you're still young enough that you're supposed to be screwing things up and taking risks and really questioning. But as Mormons, we miss that early 20s. Take your risks, fall down, get up, try again, take your risks, because you already have kids, you already have other people.
And risks lead to existential issues. You can't take some risks. You can't go try alcohol. You can't try coffee. You can't date someone that's not a member of the church because, oh my gosh, that's going to affect you forever. We can't do those things because every choice is tied to an existential idea
Consequence.
that may or may not be true, but everything is tied to that existential consequence or reward. Ultimately, consequence sounds more appropriate because it's not the reward we're looking for, it's the avoiding the consequences that we're looking for.
Yeah. So, and then within the church, though, as well, like I feel like the role, like I talk a lot about, being a mom and things, and that's like my role here right now on earth. But it's hard to not think about in the church about what we say is our eternal, role, and feeling the lack right here and now on the earth of my role within the church really made me wonder, well, what is it going to look like for me in my eternal role? Because we're taught that we're supposed to become gods and goddesses. If we are children of God, literal children of God, then we get to become gods and goddesses. My husband would be my partner as a god, in this eternal role. And I just started wondering, well, am I supposed to just be like an eternal baby maker? And that's what I'm supposed to do? Am I supposed to and so I really felt this lack of I don't know what being a woman in the next life looks like, and nobody could tell me. Yeah.
Well, and
Yeah.
I love that. I'm sorry.
You
Mason,
didn't
go
raise
ahead.
your hand, Sarah. You didn't raise your hand. I'm sorry. You
I
have
didn't
to
see
wait.
it, Mason. Okay, I'm waiting.
I just had this idea that I wanted to throw out there because, again, I'm not a woman, right? So I hear you talking about these things, and they're very real issues that I never thought about. If I thought about that at all, it was, how am I going to handle these 20 women? Right? It's a completely different perspective. Yeah. But the thing that really struck me is that in your life here on earth, you're taught that everything is about your role as a mother. But if you look at the way that we talk about mother in heaven or don't talk about mother in heaven, everything in this life is about being a mother, and in that life you disappear. Mm-hmm. And I think that speaks a lot to some of the reasons that we reach out for that understanding, is because if everything is about being a mom here, but I disappear as a mom there, I'm missing something.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and it's that parallel of, if you disappear here, you will also disappear there.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
I'm sorry, Jordan, you were saying something.
Yeah. So I've always thought of this kind of as like a donkey and a carrot kind of situation, where this doctrine has been it's been around for, since Joseph Smith,
Well,
1830s.
not always thought it, like since we've left the church, you've developed this idea.
Yes. But they kind of hang this Heavenly Mother doctrine out there as this carrot for you to keep following, keep chasing. But you're never going to get to it. There's nothing behind it that they're ever going to talk about or reveal. Every time you try to talk about it, they're like, oh, she's too holy to talk about. God wouldn't want us to put her name out there because then somebody might slander it, or all these other things, and yet
she's too special.
She's too special. Yeah. But here we are. I would say if there is a Heavenly Father and Mother, I would say they're probably both pretty special.
And she's a freaking god. Like a god couldn't handle it. I mean, come on. Sorry.
Right. Well, and go ahead.
Tell us how you really feel, Kayla. Don't hold back.
Yeah. But despite all this, we can't talk about her, even though we're talking about God constantly.
And it's
God
Heavenly
the Father.
Father's plan.
Yeah.
It's Heavenly Father and Jesus Christ's plan. But no, did Heavenly Mother have anything to do with it? We don't know.
Of course not. We would
invisible.
never listen to her. Yeah, we wouldn't listen to her anyway. She has terrible ideas.
So a couple of my thoughts is right, she has a vagina. And since she's in the since she's in the celestial kingdom, she gets to keep her vagina. Whereas if she was in the terrestrial or telestial, apparently it gets
gender.
I don't know.
I mean, she gets to be silent still, right?
Or something. I don't know. We all turn into Barbies with no genitalia in the telestial and terrestrial world. But no, when you're in your 20s, like your mid to late 20s and your early 30s, what we're doing from a developmental phase is we are learning to interface with our surroundings and our world and our experiences without an authority figure giving us all the rules and telling us what to do. So it's that transition, and really we want our kids to start this in their late teens, 16, 17, 18, where they are finally able to go, I don't need my mom and dad to tell me what time to be home, because now I'm old enough to recognize that if I stay up until 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning and I have to be at work the next day at 8 o'clock in the morning, I'm going to feel miserable. I no longer need my mom or my dad to give me the rules and the boundaries, because as that adult, I'm learning to establish those rules and boundaries for myself. The other thing that starts to happen in our 20s and our early 30s is that we start to move away from that teenage brain space where the whole world revolves around just us. The world shifts its axis again, and we are no longer the sun of the world, and we begin to learn how our actions and the actions of others affect us at a much larger scale. When we have kiddos, there's changes obviously throughout our entire body, and our neurology is not exempt from that. Like those mama bear instincts kick in, and there's a lot of other things, and I've seen this whether you're an adoptive parent or not, because my first one was adopted, and I can guarantee the mama bear instincts woke up about, I don't know, Mason, a week or two after we'd had Eric. All of a sudden I had all the hormone changes. Kind of crazy. I would love to do more research on that.
Out.
You blocked out all the changes. But really what happens is that as we begin to be able to focus outside of ourselves in a healthy way to protect our young so that they can grow, our young begin to depend on us for what we used to depend on our parents for. So they depend on us for food. They depend on us for sustenance. They depend on us for emotional connection. Like we need our mothers and our fathers. We need eye contact with them. We need skin to skin contact with them in order for oxytocin to release appropriate, in order for us to bond and feel that connection. One of the things that we know is that when you take a baby away from its caregiver and they don't have those connections, they suffer with certain attachment disorders into their adulthood years, that when we're not interfacing with our young. So if we take babies and we put them in cribs and they don't have somebody responding to their cries, they develop and they have a lot of disorders or challenges in their life with empathy forever. And so when we when we look at this, and it's something that we can train. I'm not at all saying that if you're a victim of this in your own life, that you cannot live a whole beautiful life, but usually there needs to be healing and help along the way in order for you to develop these skills. So when we take this from this spiritual piece, and from the moment you're born, you only have a relationship with your heavenly Father, what are we missing from the perspective of what could I gain if I had a heavenly mother?
Mhm.
And if we have, like, the proclamation to the world and all these other things, like mothers and fathers are equal, we're both supposed to be there, we've got different intrinsic roles, all of those pieces in there. And if this earth life is a type for the next one, why are we separating babies and young from their mothers and expecting them to have healthy spiritual relationships? It just doesn't make any sense.
No.
Well, and can I add in there too, because this is why I grabbed the family proclamation. If you look at that document, you'll see that there's
So, Alex,
one
if you
thing in
could pull that
specific.
document up, the little picture
It
of that guy, there it is.
says, if you go down to, it's like the second to last paragraph or something. Anyway, it says, by divine design, fathers are to preside over their families in love and righteousness and are responsible to provide the necessities of life and protection for their families. Okay, maybe Heavenly Father does that too. I don't know. But then the next line is, mothers are primarily responsible for the nurture of their children. Well, if you ask the question, what are we missing by not having a relationship with Mother in heaven? I would answer that by their doctrine, what we're missing is nurturing.
Mm-hmm.
So
And that somehow we're supposed to get that from Heavenly Father, but by design he's not supposed to have that. Like, I don't know, we look at this God figure and he's very unnatural according to what, I mean, if he's supposed to be a type of what we're going to be someday, it's very unnatural for the man to be everything for us.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So one way that that I was taught, or that I learned to connect with Heavenly Mother, and actually I would say it was a term I learned called the feminine divine, because I started, I made connections through like Instagram to other women who felt very strongly about Heavenly Mother, and it actually really inspired my creative mind to express these feelings and emotions that I had about Heavenly Mother. Would you be okay if I read the poem I wrote about her?
Oh, please do. And if you're willing, we would love to have a copy of it, and we can publish that on the website and whatnot, so that other people have access to it. If you're willing for that, we would love that.
For sure. So it's a poem called Here, and I really actually think that it lines up perfectly with what we're talking about in nurturing a baby and the mother relationship and that bond. So it says, I've been waiting for you, but not because you haven't arrived. You're already here. I've been waiting for you. There's no grand entrance, no fanfare, because you've been here since before the world began. It's creation you birthed, screaming from your womb, and yet you made not a sound. You silently birthed the world, and the world has kept your silence. We rooted for you, pounding our fists against your chest, straining our ears, until finally we could hear your breath on the wind telling us that you gave us life. We made our slow crawl, following the beat of your heart, the larghetto drum reverberating to our hearts that you are here. We have been placed upon you, our feet stepping in time to your heartbeat, but never realizing how close we were to your nourishing breast. Our noses catching whiffs of your floral fragrance, but still too far away. Only some make that instinctual crawl, navigating their way to your warm, rounded breasts, where we can at last suckle on your milk that never runs dry and fills us with your love, sustenance that makes our bellies ache with want for more, and a yearning to turn to our sibling and point at you saying, she is here.
It's beautiful. Absolutely beautiful.
So that was really like my first poem that I wrote about Heavenly Mother, and just the points in there. One thing that you can do actually is place a baby on a woman's chest, and they will make a crawl to the mother's breast and feed, and it's really a neat thing to witness. But it really just reflected that feeling like I didn't have this. I had these senses. I had parts of it. Like I could maybe catch a glimpse of her here or see her there, but I didn't really know what I was looking at. I didn't really have the words to express who she was, or what she was, only that she meant a lot to me. And I wanted that, and I needed that, and I knew that she was giving me something, but, and yet like nobody could tell me who she was. Nobody could tell me, this is my mom.
Right. Well, and you're not in Mormonism, you're not allowed to ask, really. You're not allowed to talk about it, really. About the only person I know of in Mormonism who's been able to speak openly about the potential of a Heavenly Mother and not get excommunicated for it is Carolyn Pearson. And how Carolyn Pearson has been able to escape the excommunication chopping block is fascinating. Like, it's beyond me how she's escaped. And way to go, Carolyn Pearson. And I was actually telling Mason this earlier. I feel like a lot of Carolyn Pearson's work is really targeted at a much younger audience, like teenagers and whatnot, which is wonderful. Like that's her audience, is where she thrives. My Turn on Earth is definitely, I feel, more for a younger audience, something that as an older audience we can take things from, but the entertainment value is generally geared more towards your youth. But I don't think we as women truly understand the significance of mothers until we become them ourselves, until we are sacrificing our life and they're wiping their boogers on us and pooping on us and peeing on us, and you're filled with nothing but adoration and love for this leaking thing of bodily fluids that is completely dependent on you. You can say that. I mean, you can laugh, Mason, but it's true.
Well, my thought is that, I feel like as a people, we haven't really delved into what is it that we're lacking by not having a mother in heaven. And I think the easiest way to answer that question is by asking the question here: what does a family lack here without a mother? And I think that if you can explore that, because there's lots of research that goes into that, what does how does a family respond when there's no father? How does a family respond when there's no mother? There's lots of research that delves into these questions. Well, if you're able to ask that question about mother in heaven, we're not better for it. We're not better for not having a relationship with a mother that is existential. And so then I naturally go to the question, well, then who benefits if the family's not benefiting by not having this relationship? Who does benefit from this? And then it becomes a power issue. If a husband is denying his children access to and a relationship with their mother, unless there's some sort of safety issue, which of course will happen sometimes, unless there's some sort of safety issue, it's almost always about control. It's about power. It's about me maintaining the power over this situation. And so that naturally then goes into either God or this organization who claims to speak for God. It is about power. It is about control, because they're the only ones that benefit from not allowing a relationship with someone who is supposedly able to provide so much nurture, so much care, so much to us. Most of us who had at least a decent mother would never give up that experience. We would never want to go back and say, well, you know what, I wouldn't mind trying it without my mom. Let's just see how this works out. That wouldn't be the case. Not for those of us that had at least a decent mother. I'm not talking about trauma or abuse. If that was where we were, we wouldn't want to change it. And so we as a community lose, which means somebody gains. And I think that's how we really break down this issue from a dynamic viewpoint, from a large viewpoint. Why is this a problem? You know, on a personal level, we can attack it from different ways. We can just say, well, screw it. I believe in God, or I believe in a mother in heaven. I'm going to form a relationship with her and make that a part of my life. But as an organization, of course, it comes from a different dynamic.
Well, and I just want to put a plug in here because I've seen so many LGBT families raising children, and babies are okay. You know, I've seen children raised by two men. I've seen children raised by two women. And really where those children are most successful is when they have two caregivers who are doing everything that they know how. I mean, and I'm not talking about being perfect parents. I'm talking about doing the best that you know how, and
Sure.
working consistently at making sure that babies are safe and that those bottom three rungs of Maslow's hierarchy of needs are being met. So these are your physiological needs, you know, food, water, rest, sleep. I said rest, sleep. That's the same. Safety, both physical safety, psychological safety, intellectual safety, and then love and belonging. If we have those things, kiddos turn out well. But the majority of children that are raised in LGBT families still have very positive role models that are both male and female. We need both healthy, positive, loving male, female relationships in order to develop into whole, healthy humans. And so I think about one client that I have, they're two dads. They've raised like 4 kids together. They're doing great. These kids are well adjusted. They know that they're loved. Their aunties and their grandmas are there to fill that role of I'll call it just the feminine divine, or the feminine connection, where they, you know, when they need that extra nurturing, they have it, and their two daddies are doing a fabulous job. And so I just want to make sure that we put that out there. And then also, Mason, to just add to what you were saying, like if a man is withholding a mother relationship, it's for power. I want to put the spin on that, vice versa. It goes both ways.
Sure.
I've seen a lot of women who will, you know, power grab and not let their husbands or fathers have a significant relationship, or they limit access to the kiddos. And again, unless there is a legitimate safety issue, it's just not healthy. The kiddos need that. And it's one of the things that comes to mind for me is, so we have 4 children who are adopted. And Mason and I have been the best parents that we know how to be. Every single one of our adopted kids want to know about their birth parents. There is a biological, like DNA need to connect with the people who created them, that made them. Like, where does this come from? And it's highly researched. We know it happens. I don't necessarily know if we know why it happens, but every single one of my adopted kids want to meet their birth families, both their mothers and their fathers, but most of them, their mothers. It's very that draw for who is the woman who birthed me. What is that connection like? All of them, all 4 of them have sought that out. And of all 4 of them, I don't think any of them have met their birth fathers except for our youngest. The rest of them have met their birth mothers, and it has filled this hole in them. And it has not threatened their relationship with Mason and I at all. Rather, it's enriching, because they know where they came from. It's like, you created me. You're the one who held me safe for 9 months while I developed. You're the first person that was there. And they want that. And my one daughter, who has not had that opportunity, she cries and craves. She cries and craves it. And the only reason she hasn't is because we can't find her birth mom.
Well, and she's not quite old enough for it yet. There's other things
She's
going
10.
on, but yeah, I mean, and it brings me back to this idea. Even the Mormon doctrine supports the idea of having a relationship with Mother in Heaven, even though they talk about how that's not okay. Dallin H. Oaks gave this talk recently about how families are always going to be better when you have a husband and a wife in the family. And he says, that's always better. But then he, of course, says that, but 2 dads or 2 moms is not going to be okay. But this idea that we're asking for an ideal on this earth that we're denying in an existential way. And it doesn't speak true to the kind of doctrine they're wanting us to accept.
I think there's a really big problem in going along with what you're saying. There's a big problem in the church and in the world in general of this like binary of masculine traits and feminine traits, and you can't cross over. And there's I think some may refer to that as toxic masculinity.
Right.
But you have this separation where men can't employ feminine traits that they have. Women can't employ masculine traits that they have. Like we all have some of both,
Absolutely.
Men have estrogen, women have testosterone. Little known fact, women actually have more testosterone than they have estrogen. It's not a binary, and I don't think it was ever meant to be. And just because you have 2 dads or 2 moms doesn't mean they can't provide you with some of the feminine or the masculine traits that they also have and that they share. And for me, with Kayla really going out and trying to learn so much about a feminine divine, for me, that was kind of a wake up in being able to be more accepting and trying to develop some of my more feminine traits and realizing I have a deep connection with my actual mom, my biologic mom, and like why could I not have that same kind of connection with or why should I not desire that same kind of connection with a divine mother,
Right. And how does it actually diminish your relationship with your divine father?
Exactly.
In reality, in a healthy relationship, it doesn't diminish it at all.
No, I think if anything, it would enhance it. And I think it would
Absolutely.
enhance my relationship with my wife, with my kids, just being able to say, yes, I'm a man, but I can also cry. I can also show emotion. I can be, I don't have to be this like stoic, stone cold face all the time. Like, I just wish.
Stone Cold Steve Austin, man.
I only laughed while he was saying that because he always teases me because I didn't cry on our wedding day. He cried, and I just was like, but so he just teases me. But anyway, it was just funny.
Well, there's so many different ways in our relationship that we're reversed. She just has the normal typical man's response and I have the typical woman's response, and I think that it's healthy to it's healthy to be able to respond the way that feels natural. Whether that's male or female has absolutely no relevance.
Let's take a quick break, and we'll be right back.
The world's most exciting podcast, home of borders, language, culture. And here he is, New York Times best-selling author and National Radio Hall of Fame inductee, Michael Savage.
I'm Michael Savage, host of the Savage Nation podcast, home of borders, language, and culture. Be here or be nowhere. The Savage Nation podcast.
Catch the Michael Savage podcast on all podcast platforms every Tuesday and every Friday.
Yeah. And just
So-
as we're
Oh,
sorry.
go ahead. No, go ahead, Kayla.
Well, I was just going to say, just as we're expanding, upon like the idea that men and women can have, different roles, I like, again, focusing back on, the Heavenly Mother and that particular thing. I feel like when we talk about Heavenly Mother, we're only talking about her role as being a mother. And that is really hard for a lot of people, especially people who are in the non-binary category they actually don't like talking about Heavenly Mother, as I've had conversations with these people.
Many of them don't, yes.
Because they don't want this to fall into the binary of a father and a mother, or a male and a female figure. And I would say as well that when we start, after I've stepped away from the church and no longer count myself as a member, it's really easy for me to now see that the church really cultivates the idea that a woman is only a wife or a mother when they refer to their partner as Sister Oaks, or the wife of Sister blah blah blah, or the even in their funerals they're not referred to by their name or by their actions, but by their husband's actions and what their husband did. They're not, women in the church are not given the opportunity to be their own person.
Right.
And you can really see how the church doesn't value women for their unique, distinctive roles. They value women so that they can have sons who can become strong leaders in the church.
Yep.
And that's just putting it bluntly.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well,
and if you flipped it around, now you're not Mrs. Mason Westbrook. Now I'm Mr. Sarah Westbrook. So many people will be like, I don't think so. We're not doing that crap. But because it's what women have just grown up with, because this isn't just a Mormon issue, this is a societal issue.
Yeah.
Right.
That's what we've grown up with. We just accept it as well. That's just the way that it is. And
Right.
ooh.
Yeah. So we have about 15 minutes left before our producer has to go. So just want to make sure that we're wrapping some of this up a little bit. But to speak about the roles, one of the things that I think Mason and I have worked really hard on over the course of our marriage is to recognize what are Mason's individual strengths and what does he bring to the relationship, both as my partner, not necessarily my husband, but as my partner, and then as the father of our children. What are the things that he does, and how can we play to those strengths so that our children get the best of both of us? So like in our home, I have multiple sclerosis. So come the evening, I'm done. Like I'm wiped out. My brain is gone. And so for as long as I can remember, unless Mason was deployed, Mason has done the bedtime routine. He's done the reading of the stories. He's done the baths. He's done the tucking in. He's done the kissing goodnight. And I just like kind of close the bedroom door, and Mason will send the kids in. I hug them goodnight. I give them a kiss, and we're good. The morning routine, that's definitely Sarah's thing. Like I am patient with the kids. First thing in the morning, Mason tends to come in a little bit more rushed because Mason's used to going to work at like 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning because he's anesthesia. And so, I tend to do the morning. I tend to organize the chores. I tend to kiss the boo-boos better. Even though Mason's a nurse anesthetist, when it comes to the medical issues of the kiddos, that definitely falls in my world. And I'm the advocate of the kiddos. Like we play to each other's strengths. And I think that that's really what makes us the most successful. And have we always done that? Great. No, we've definitely fucked it up a lot over the years. But I think that as parents kind of lose this idea of this is the man's job and this is the woman's job. And we just say, what am I good at? And what are you good at? And how can we put this together to show up best for our children, our relationship, our circumstances, that we become better parents, better caregivers, better humans in general. So in closing, I would love to hear, how did this mother in heaven thing influence you walking away from Mormonism?
Well, for me, I think it opened up, I would say, that can of worms that as I started taking the risks into looking into things that were not okay or taboo to talk about, that I became more and more comfortable with looking into things that are hard to face and that are uncomfortable to talk about. And it also showed me how there's a lot of, like with the SEC scandal and the bishop's hotline that, is protecting abusers. And
Right.
that calls attorneys rather than mental health advocates.
It just made it so much more clear to me as I widened my view on these issues and allowed myself to question. And one thing that I will say that my Heavenly Mother path gave me was a community of women and a community of other people as well. Not just for a while, it was more women, but I've expanded it to include men and other folks, non-binary as well, to help give me views that are dissenting. It's given me a place where I can dissent and openly say, like, no, I don't agree with this. And then even further have conversations about it and why. Right. And that community really helped me to give me a better understanding of where other people are coming from and their experiences and how their experiences are not my experiences and vice versa. And I think it overall gave me a lot more empathy. And like, I listened to your first podcast episode and what your goal was. And part of that goal was to help people to grow and learn. And that is honestly where I think this led me. It was because I allowed myself to have this growing and learning expansion that ultimately led me out of the church. It wasn't Heavenly Mother that led me out of the church. It was the fact that I pursued an idea that made me realize there were things wrong. And and that, and it wasn't something, once it became an important and passionate topic for me, it was something I could no longer ignore. And so, especially like the bishop's hotline, I was like, how can I support paying my tithing to something? I'm a mandated reporter. Like, how can I support paying my tithing to something that, I don't know where my money's going. I don't know where this is. And I'm like, I can't support that. And that led to me having my temple recommend withheld because we weren't paying our tithing. And I was like, well, I'll pay to other organizations. And they were like, nope, not good enough. And I was like, okay, well, I am okay with that too, because I can't be complacent or complicit in this anymore. And
isn't that tithing issue so funny? Because now that there's been the leak, we know the church has enough money to do whatever it needs to do. So what's wrong with paying 10% of your income to a reputable organization that you're passionate about if the law of tithing is about giving and improving other people's lives and feeding the poor and taking care of those who are less fortunate than you? Why does it matter where the money goes, not what it's as about, long as you're generous? I love what you said, Kayla, because for me, as you said that, I wrote myself a little note here. I just want to read it. It says, Mormonism isn't a safe place for women's voices to be heard, understood, and influencing for change.
Yeah.
So,
hey, Alex asked a question that if you don't want to answer, please don't. But I just want to read it because maybe you do. He said, "Can you ask if she has ever had any direct contact with the feminine divine, spoken, seen, gotten messages, that kind of thing? Has that become a thing for you? And if you're willing to share, would love to hear that from you."
When I was first seeking out this connection, it kind of started out through prayer. But then it kind of turned more into just me. It felt almost like in a meditative place or state of mind. And I for sure heard voices that did not feel like my own voices, talking to me, telling me things that felt true and right to my heart. And whether that was my own conscience or whatever you want to make of it, it felt to me like that was a true connection to my Heavenly Mother, which now I view Heavenly Mother, Heavenly Father differently. I have a more expanded view of, what I feel like they are, and I don't want to put them or God in a box either. But those were really important discussions that I had with them, where I just felt like I was speaking to my parents, and specifically my Heavenly Mother, telling me like, it's okay, honey, like you need to do this. So.
Yeah. I love that, because those types of spiritual experiences are very personal. So if it's meaningful and impactful for you, and it brought you healing and a deeper understanding and made you more generous and kind and accepting and loving, then whether or not there is a literal male, female figure that represents a Heavenly Father and Mother, or it's something else, however it touched you, that female part of what touched you is what you needed at the time to heal. And so I love that, because those personal experiences are very significant. I see that in my clinic when people connect in a spiritual way, which is like connecting with other living things, whether that be a divine or animals or nature or other living humans, whatever that may be, that it is healing, it is significant, and we can see those changes in you from a medicinal place. Like we can see that as you connect with a Heavenly Mother, it lowers your stress, it improves your overall well-being, and that's a very positive thing. So I love that. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. Jordan, did you have any final thoughts that you wanted to share with us today?
Yeah, I just wanted to share kind of same question. You asked Kayla, where did I go from here to lead me kind of out of the church? For me, I would say I agree a lot that just kind of exploring this and seeing Kayla explore this, feminine divine idea gave me, I think, permission to question and consider the fact that, I'm in my previous convictions may be wrong. And, it led me into like exactly some of the things that she said, some of the like the SEC, the child abuse, like all these things that have kind of come up recently in the last couple of years. And I've kind of been able to separate it into two groups of things that kind of have given me problems with the church. One is moral, behavioral kind of issues, and the other one that I started to explore a little bit later was like truth claims with the church, and that was like really eye-opening for me, especially seeing like the amount of gaslighting and lying and cover-ups that the church has, the extent the church has gone to prevent members from learning about, a whole bunch of things. I won't get into all of it, but we've I've listened. If I don't know if you've listened to the Mormon Stories LDS, what's it called? LDS Discussions series. But
that's Sarah's favorite.
Yeah. It's just been like really eye-opening for me to see all the things that have gone on with that, and that's kind of where I really lost my faith in the church. I think I lost my faith in in some of the good morals of the church leading up to that when I learned about these other things, but learning about like the truth claims was really kind of what drove me away.
Yeah.
So
no, I hear it. For me, it was the sexual coercion of early leaders of our very young females that really just
terrible.
I was just like, I can't do it.
Yep.
Sorry.
Yep.
For me, it was leadership's inability to take responsibility for the pain that they've caused with really just lousy decisions, or always quote unquote blaming God for it. We've never been racist. It was God that put that policy in place. We can't fix that, right? And it's just, so everybody has their issues that really pull them out and or allow them, not necessarily pull them out, but take them to the place. Like you guys both just said, this took me to the place where it was okay for me to investigate further. It was okay for me to question whether or not this was true, to question whatever actually cemented my testimony at some point in time in my life. It allowed me to question that process, question the reality of that. So, yeah.
And I just, sorry, one more like thought from just overall theme is just that it really did give me back my personal authority, and to say, like, like Sarah was saying earlier about, parents giving you that permission to do things, and us, leaving that behind. I felt like I had left the church parents behind and said, no, this isn't for me. And it was that was such an empowering part for me to claim that back. I feel like maybe I'm not a fully fledged like spiritual adult yet, but like I'm getting there. So
it takes time.
I love that you had talked about earlier about kind of growing, because you started asking all these questions. So you started growing, and I know that is it RFM says that he feels like he graduated from the church for like he got a 6th grade education, and then he was like, okay, that was a good foundation, now I can move on to other things and I can look at things more in context. And so he kind of graduated from the church. For me, I look more at it like I just outgrew it. It was a great place to grow up. There was a lot of, for me, safety in my church home. In fact, there was more safety for me in my church family than there was in my family of origin. But I got to a place where the concepts just didn't, the concepts, the teachings, the doctrines, they just didn't work for me anymore. I outgrew them, and I needed to be able to shed that part of me in order to truly embrace humanity for what humanity is, without judgment and with just that understanding. As Jordan was talking about, extreme poverty, being able to look at those in extreme poverty as whole humans who are just as intelligent, just as capable as I am. They just have a very different set of circumstances and set of resources. If we swapped places in life, if they had been born with the same privileges that I had, there's no difference between them and me.
Yeah.
And being able to see people in that way, and not look at people who are in poverty as a threat to my well-being, like, oh my goodness, if I give too much, they're going to harm me, and these types of things. But our family is multi-ethnic. We've got kiddos from multiple races and cultures, and so being able to let these children in, but also to let them embrace their home culture and what is valuable to them as they grow up and it becomes significant or meaningful to them, for us to be able to say, yes, embrace it, learn about it, and not feel like them learning about their own cultures or their own ideals or where they come from as being threatening to their eternal salvation, but rather as enriching and making them connect with their ancestry in meaningful ways, so that way they can make positive social change and become their own authentic humans, is just so vitally important. And I had to leave Mormonism in order to shed the fear that letting things in that were different would be harmful. That's a very archaic, it's a very like unevolved idea that things that are different are dangerous. It's very old thinking. So I'm grateful to have outgrown the need for the church. Yeah. So any last thoughts before we end today? I know that Mason had talked to you guys about coming back for a part of our temple series, and we would love to do that and have you guys back for that. But is there any other thoughts you wanted to say on today's topic before we wrap up?
Anything else?
I don't know. I think I've said all my stuff related to this. So yeah.
Okay.
Great.
Well, thank you guys for being here.
Great discussion.
Good. We love it. We love being able to just have different perspectives that, not necessarily, I mean, we've basically agreed on everything that was said, but to have it come from a different perspective, because, Mother in Heaven certainly was not a crucial issue for me at all, but seeing how it was for you and where it led to is important, because you're not alone. There's people out there who are in a very similar position to you. And that's the hope of this podcast, is to let people realize they're not alone on what's going on inside their heads. So that they, they have that community, they have that ability to say, hey, I'm okay. Other people struggled with this too. Where do I go now? What do I want to do? Because some people will make the choice you did and they'll leave the church. Others will investigate and say, you know what, this is still the best place for me, even with these issues. And that's great. Like, we've never, ever suggested that someone needed to leave or stay. This is about understanding the issues, understanding how they impact us, and then making the best choice for us, for our mental, physical health, and driving forward from there. So,
absolutely.
thank you guys for being here and being a part of that.
Yeah. I think that we did, that's kind of this broad stroke today. And I think that this could give us an opportunity to really dig in the future to some of the more specifics and really do kind of like a deep dive on it later. And so we'll probably tear this apart in the future and really explore each of the ideas separately. I think that would be very significant. So thank you so much for painting in broad strokes. Go ahead, Kayla. What were you going to say?
One more thing. Sorry. As he was saying, where do I go now? This was a thought I was having as we were talking, that I'm like, where I am now is I want to focus on issues that are currently affecting our world now. And I think that, this could be really interesting to explore in the temple later, but that there's a lot of focus on the church and the eternal and think celestial and all of that. And this has really opened my eyes to being like, you know what, there's a lot of suffering going on right now that we can work towards eliminating in the world. Yeah. And I would prefer my time and efforts be on what I can do now, and not so much worried about what may come later.
Right. A future that's not visible or tangible. Like, let's make things better now, because if there is a future that's not visible and tangible, if we're working to make it better here, then that would only, the logical sequences, the next life will be better if I'm doing the best I can to make a positive impact today, right here, right now, and reducing suffering today. So absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely love that. Yeah. So real quick before we go, I just want to let you know that sometimes as we close this up, you'll get a message on your screen that says, don't close the screen before you go. So if you could please just make sure you follow those prompts on the screen. And Alex just popped in. So Alex, did you have any last thoughts or anything you want to say?
That was all I was going to say, is just if you could leave your browsers open, that was it. And then Kayla, I really appreciate you answering that question. It didn't come out of completely nowhere. I have friends who have, spoken directly with the feminine divine, and that's why I asked. So I really appreciate you sharing that. Thank you. And I never intend for Mason to bust me about I'm the one who asked the question. I'm trying to feed questions to the interviewers, but thank you for answering my question. Thanks a lot. Thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely. Well, and I want to say too, I also have had an experience with what I would call the feminine divine, where it was much more nurturing and gentle than anything ever before. And it was kind of like that's that female piece, not so much outlined as a mother in heaven for me, because I don't know how I'm still working through how I think about that, but definitely that spiritual experience that I would feel came more from the feminine piece of divine. So yeah, you're not alone in that. So, well, thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you next time. We definitely want to leave the invitation for all of our listeners. If you have any questions or comments directed at Jordan or Kayla, we would love to be able to forward those to them. All you have to do is email us at daisygirlcommunications@gmail.com, and we will absolutely do that. And if you would like to have them back to further discuss this, please just let us know. We would love to invite our listeners to get engaged in this conversation, because this was a great big broad stroke, and we could go very deep into this many more times and even create a mini series on the feminine divine and mother in heaven. So thank you so much for joining us today. Can't wait to have you back, and we will see everybody later. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Deuces.
Unpacking Mormonism and Other Religious Trauma is hosted by Sarah and Mason Westbrook. Produced by Daisy Girl Communications, LLC, and Alex Fidalis. please join our community on Facebook. Music provided by Musa and John Worthy Music.
Shop Plato's Closet tax-free August 2nd through 4th for back-to-school styles. We sell the trendy, gently used styles you need to make a difference in the world and in your wallet for back-to-school shopping. Save up to 70% off regular retail prices by choosing recycled styles. Save even more when you shop tax-free this weekend. Make a change that others can respect and repeat. Shop Plato's Closet in North Charleston and West Ashley this year for your back-to-school looks. Plato's Closet, located in West Ashley on Sam Rittenberg Boulevard and North Charleston on Rivers Avenue.
Chicken tacos should only be trusted to chicken professionals.
That's where we come in. Introducing Zaxby's new chicken finger tacos. One comes with pico de gallo and creamy chipotle ranch. And the other comes with bacon, lettuce, tomato, and avocado ranch. Chicken experts since 1990. Chicken taco experts since now. Order yours today in the Zax Rewards app. Woo, saucy! Zaxby's.